in studio in Rochester, New York. And of course, we've got Matt Bloom, Mike Bloom. Why did I say Matt?
I don't know. You're all over the place
Bloom,
already.
Bloom, I only have one cup of coffee. But we got Bloom around in Chicago, and we're going to go do our thing with Junior Hockey Live tonight. We got a great opportunity here for everybody to learn some things about Swedish hockey. We're going to cover. I'm excited, Bloomer. I'm really excited about this. We're going to have Jacob Dahlin on, and if you don't know, he does a podcast, Swedish Junior Hockey, and we'll have him explain his podcast duties on. But we're going to go through the process of you're an American, you're a North American, you're a Canadian American. Is there an opportunity to play hockey in Sweden? So, Mike, what do you think?
I'm excited. I think I'm going to pick up some things just hearing what what he's sharing with us. It's a little bit different than what we're used to, and we always get so focused in on the junior leagues here in the United States, and then maybe sometimes a little bit into Canada. But going all the way across the pond, there's some really good hockey that's been played out there, and it's something that we're used to pulling kids from there to our league. But there's a lot of players that decide to go the other direction too. So I'm excited. I think
Did you just say
all going to learn
across the pond?
I did.
Okay.
There's a body of water there that you have to fly over.
That's your way of being colloquial and trying to fit in with the crowd is throw a little across the pond in.
If I had a collar to pop like you do, then I would have done it, but I don't.
It doesn't pop, man. It just stays straight up.
Yeah, okay.
I wish I could pop it down. Hey, listen, let's talk a little bit about what you did this last weekend hockey-wise, and then, of course, we'll jump on with our guest here in a second. But we've got Jacob Dahlin on. We're going to be talking about Swedish hockey. But, Bloomer, what did you do this weekend? Where were you?
Well, I only had one game, and it was here locally. I did end up getting COVID for the third time, so I'm battling through that right now. So right now, my schedule is completely open except for watching games.
You sneeze and you call it COVID.
Is that what I do?
Man. Yeah. Just because you sneeze, it does not mean you have COVID. So let's get that straight right away.
I'm trying to set the record.
We're gonna go live now and pick up the East Coast and Jacob Dahlin. How you doing, sir?
Hi, I'm good. Good.
So obviously the last few years you've been a big contributor. You participate with our junior hockey discussion group. You participate with questions on our live streams. You've developed your own podcast that is starting to get some great guests. I think you've probably put out about 20 or 30 of them since June, nailing it there. But you and I have a relationship that goes back a little bit further than the last 2 or 3 years.
We do through a mutual coach, Brian Guck.
Correct. But you used to be a fan of a different broadcast.
I did. Yeah. I was listening a little bit on the old days as well. So
yeah, the old days, we had both a brick and mortar, 2 radio stations, both in Western New York and in the Detroit market. And then we were probably one of the first to, it was before what we know as streaming now, but USA Hockey allowed us to put a button on their main page that said, listen to the Maximum Hockey Radio Show. And then we had all these individual rinks or organizations. I think we had 170, 180 youth organizations put their button on the websites too. So we were doing the download thing in a kind of a different way than people do it now. But geez, that had to be at least 10, 12 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
That was a ways ago.
Things have changed a little bit, but keyboards are still not waterproof, right?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. That was a bad night the other night when I dumped a full, and here's where I work it in, a full University of Michigan cup of coffee on all my equipment. So I had to order a bunch of new, luckily smaller, more inexpensive things, peripheral things, but it was not a good night. But the show went on. I did not stop broadcasting the other night. I got the whole show in. So if you're new to us, this is Junior Hockey Advisor. This is our show, Junior Hockey Live. We do this once a week, and we pick a different junior league to discuss junior hockey, discuss the players, the league, how they work, the interactions. This week's different, a little unique. We're going to talk about Swedish hockey. Jacob, first tell us about your podcast, and then anybody that wants to jump on, we do have the ability for you to jump right into the chat, and you should be able to jump right into chat from whatever platform you're watching on. And I'll monitor that because my equipment, I'm running on one monitor. But tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I started. So my son's 17; he's an 05, and we were looking at. So I grew up in Sweden, in Leksand, and big hockey market there in a tiny little town of 10,000 people, but they play in the SHL, and the opportunity came for him to. He finished high school a year early, and during the whole time about, all right, what do we want to do next year? Do we take a year and go up and play in Michigan or somewhere and play Tier 1? Or do you go play juniors and then you have the opportunity to go play in Sweden? And one of the things that we discovered was no one over here knows anything about Swedish junior hockey.
That's true.
Other than when it comes to kind of the World Juniors, and that becomes kind of the conversation, and then we start talking about Swedish players in the draft. Those are the two times that people talk about Swedish junior players, but no one really knows. So when we were looking at, and one of the concerns that I had as a parent was, losing touch from if you want to go and play at the collegiate level, how do you stay in front and how do you stay connected? And it's a real issue and somewhat of a problem of when you go over there, you are in a different world, and it's easy to stay connected and for those who want to be able to find it, but you have to go and be interested in going. So because of that, and I was also very curious because I've lived here since 1993, and I came as an exchange student, so I didn't really know much about the Swedish junior systems anymore either. So it became a dual focus, dual purpose. So I said, well, let's do a little bit of a podcast, and followed. I have to give you props, Jeff. I kind of followed some of the motive was really educational, which is kind of how you deal with a junior hockey advisor discussion page. And so I wanted to have different guests on that just had interesting backgrounds that may be able to share their journey or how it works. So we've had a wide variety of guests, and I try to release it. I release it on Monday mornings at 7 a.m. And what's nice is that you can record it and put it in the bank and hit release at a certain time. And I missed it one week when we were in Sweden this summer, and I thought about recording a bunch, and it didn't happen. And because we were moving him in, and we got busy, and then all of a sudden you get back and dang, I got to record some podcasts. And, but it's been interesting. I mean, we've had, early on, one of the guys, from New Hampshire, Ian Gately, and he played a couple of years over there, semi-pro, and then run into immigration problems. And, so that was interesting too. And how did he end up where he ended up, and why did he go there? And the universal thing among a lot of these players that go and play in Europe is that they're pretty adventurous. And certainly you got the pro guys that are going over there that may have, man, I didn't make it in NHL, so now I'm either going to Switzerland or, you're not going the KHL route anymore. So the Swedish leagues have become attractive, but
right.
So
you're listening to Junior Hockey Live. You got Bloomer and Jeff here, and we've got our special guest on tonight, which is Jacob Dahlin. Jacob, hey Bloom, while you're sitting there, can you see if you're getting any traction on any comments going on? Because This is a new platform because of my coffee incident, and I don't see anybody coming in. If you're out there listening, please shoot us a message. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us where you're listening from. If you have a question, please throw it at us. We do have the ability to take questions. At least it looks that way on screen. So I want to just make sure we're actually truly broadcasting live. And if we don't, we will stream this anyway, because I do know that it is recording. Jacob, tell us a little bit about, most people hear J20, you hear J18, which is the age groups 2018, but I don't think all of us understand the difference between elite, good elite, super elite, triple super elite. Can you kind of walk through the different levels that are in Sweden? I understand that they're mostly built around towns, but honestly, that's about all I know. I mean, I should take that back. I know 5-6 teams that I've recruited players off of, but they're individual teams.
Yep.
I don't really have a good understanding of the leagues, nor how they all interact with each other.
And I think Elite Prospects which is a Swedish company, by the way, who's became, I mean, it's phenomenal for what I use it for. And Jeff, I kind of followed your lead and does a lot. I do everything in Elite Prospects. So there's 2 levels of juniors. So you have adult or semi-pro, which is going to be above juniors. And that is what's different with the U.S. and Canadian juniors is that this year you can be an 03 birth year, and that's your last year of juniors,
right,
which means you have another year of eligibility in the American or Canadian system. But once you are aging out of juniors, then you go into the senior teams. And in the senior teams, you have the SHL, Allsvenskan, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, and so on. And at the Division 1, 2, and 3, those are kind of semi-pro. Division 2 and 3 are more amateur levels.
Right.
But the SHL, which is, rivals the AHL. Allsvenskan, which is kind of in between AHL and the ECHL, if you want to look at the different levels. But if we then look at the junior levels, you have 2 different levels, which is J20 and J18. So if you're looking at J20 this year, that's the 03 and 04 birth years. So it's two years there.
Can an 05 play up?
Yes, and it happens all the time.
Okay.
And you can have 06s and 07s to play up. And if you remember Connor Bedard, when he was during COVID, played for HV71 J20 as a 15-year-old, I believe, for about half a season while they were shut down. So it happens. But you can't be an 02 and play. There are some situations where you can have overagers and every team can have overagers that also play. And I think it's a maximum of 3 players per team. But there's more underagers that play up than overagers that play down.
Gotcha.
Now,
so
the different levels or the names, they used to call it Super Elite and Elite in Division 1, but in Sweden, you don't want to stick out. So they changed the name to J20 National, which used to be Super Elite. So if you look at Elite Prospects now, you don't find anything about J20 Super Elite. So it's now called J20 National. That's the top level.
So if I pull up, this is J20. Is that showing up to you guys?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. I was trying to do a screen share there, and it says that I'm doing a screen share. Let's see if that works.
Yep.
So that's the J20 right now.
Yep.
And you can see all the different places. Looks like mostly on the west coast and central part of Sweden.
That's just how they got the legends in there. But that is
well, I was looking at the yellow dots on the screen on the actual map.
Yeah.
Don't those look like they're mostly on the west coast?
So that's going to be the East Coast right there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. It's the East Coast. Yeah. Silly me. I'm looking at the white part of the map and thinking that's the not the water in the because blue to me is water. So I was looking at the blue going, the blue is the water. I was like, why are they putting all those dots in the middle? Are they on ships?
And what you notice is there's not very many teams up north. I mean, and that's because the population up there, it's pretty scarce population. So there's some of the coastal cities up there, Umeå, Skellefteå, Timrå. Those are teams up there. I believe Leksand is on there, fourth from the top there, which is, I would consider that more in the central part of Sweden, but there's only 3 more northern teams up there. But that's the entire Swedish country there. So it's not divided into regions there. But that's
I'm looking right now. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I pulled up the roster, the overall rosters, and it looks like there's a good sprinkling here of players from many, many countries. Obviously, Sweden has 691, but Switzerland has 7. Slovenia has some. Slovakia has some. But what you don't see on that list is any U.S. players. It's mostly one Canadian player, but all the rest are within at least a short flight or even a short drive, depending on where you're at. So is that the norm for the top J20 league?
So it has been the norm, and it is kind of fascinating that at the top league there's 0 U.S. or Canadian players, and I believe that there's actually, when I ran the numbers, there's only 6 U.S. and 2 Canadian players playing J20 at the second level or the third level, which is region and Division 1, which used to be elite. And part of the issue is that everybody that are, that would be the junior age or the 05, 04 players that are either coming out of U18 in US and Canada and playing juniors over here, either at the tier 2 or tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 level. So it's a little bit tough. The other challenge really is immigration. And it used to be a little bit more easier to be able to get to play, but it created some problems in this past year, with the Swedish Hockey Federation required as part of the transfer that you have the right immigration status.
So, first of all, was your son a dual citizen, or was he purely American?
So he's a dual citizen, which helped a bunch.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the non-dual citizen. And maybe you haven't researched this far in for the non-dual because that wasn't your situation. But if my son's 16, 17 years old, does he fall into a student side where the guys that are the semi-pro players, they fall on a totally different visa? Am I correct on that?
You're correct, and you basically have they don't distinguish between the two at the first level. What they say is that you have to have a residence permit. If you're going to stay for more than 90 days, you have to have a residence permit, and you could get that either through being a student, either at the high school, collegiate, or doctoral level from a research standpoint. So you have to apply, or you have to work. And so the pros, they get a work permit through their clubs. And the challenge, so if you're looking at Division 3, there's 0 U.S. players at the adult Division 3 level because they don't have the funds to be able to provide proof that they have suitable employment. It used to be that some players from the U.S. would come over after college and they want to do a couple of years in Europe, and they get free housing, that kind of stuff, and they have a year or two of fun, but they crack down on that. So it's very difficult to be able to do that. So now there's some that are imports that are they're getting some compensation that enables them to get a work permit. Now, another thing that you have to realize with the Swedish government, they don't move fast. During the summertime, they have 6 weeks of vacation and things shut down. So that creates some real problems. And that is, all right, I just got a team and they want me. And now I apply for a permit, and that may take months. Right.
And all of Sweden's on vacation.
And all of Sweden's on vacation. So they're home eating their surströmming and drinking their aquavit, and they're not worried about that U.S. player that wants to come and play in August.
What was that dish that I asked you about a few years ago? Which one was that?
I can't remember if it was surströmming, which is the sour herring. You should have.
Yes.
You should have had that when you were in Stockholm.
No,
that's
no.
more of a dish up in the northern part of Sweden. But
yeah, that's when you start talking about sour fish. I think that's where I want the Danish, the coffee and the Danish. That I was in Sweden this last summer, and you're right. The amount of summer homes is just amazing when you get in the south part of Sweden. And, everything from small cottages, very, retired couple type of cottages to, these just incredible pieces of property. And they're all just taken. The one thing about it is Sweden takes care of their property. People take care of their property. It's not like the States. Lawns don't go unmowed. And what I know we're getting off because I digress. That's what I do. I'm good at it. The flags get pulled out. It's the Swedish flag, but it's more in a banner style flag, like a pennant from
vimpel.
Impel. Is that what it's called?
Vimpel.
Vimpel.
Yeah.
So it's like it looks like a triangulated flag, kind of like
more like a naval flag than
right.
Yeah.
But it's still the country's colors. And when people are in at their summer cottage, they fly the flag so that others know they're there and they can stop in and visit. And I thought that was one of the coolest things around because you're going through and looking from the water at all these beautiful places, small and large, and 90% of them have their flags flying. I'm like, this is Wednesday. In the United States, it's maybe Friday, Saturday, and you go home on Sunday. You'd see the flag fly all day Saturday and a little bit on those other days. Here, man, Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday, flags are flying. People love their summer cottages. I thought that was cool.
Yep. But okay. If you go back to the J18, so the J18 has, so that's this year is 05 and 06 birth year. So it's a little bit off compared to, U18 or and so on. But it's still considered juniors, and it really goes into the folks that are they leave ninth grade and then they go into the 3 years of high school, and that's when you start going into juniors, and you have a big differentiation, not only in the so there it's really run by the clubs. So what you saw on the map there was the clubs that are, each town has a club, or they may have in a city they may have multiple clubs,
right?
And often it's subsidized. The fees are much lower. They don't have to pay as much for ice time, and except for now they got an energy crisis, and so I'm sure they're going to raise prices. But each town has a club, and they may have a Division II team in the men's Division II, and then they may have a J20 region and a J20 region, and then you have youth hockey. Hockey, we've talked a lot about, especially in the Stockholm region, where you have these feeder clubs, and you have the big clubs like AIK, Djurgården, they're playing at the top level, and they may have, Djurgården may have four or five draft picks out of their J20 national team. I mean, really, really good players. Well, they may not have grown up in that organization. So where are they coming from? They're typically coming from the region of Stockholm, and they may go and they play up to U16 at the local level, and then after U16 they'll go into what's called gymnasium, which is the high school. So high school, which is 10th, 11th, 12th grade, And there you typically move away from home in a boarding school environment or in an apartment type environment. And they have what's called NIUs. They have two different levels, NIUs and LIUs. NIUs are the national sponsored academies, and there's like 24 of them. And the difference there is that you have an enormous amount of funding from the Swedish Hockey Federation that enables them to hire coaches, to hire staff, and they're putting an incredible program together that gives them the best of the best go into the NIU programs at the U18 level, and they may play right away. The best of the best don't play J18. They go play J20.
Jacob, back up a little bit on that. So these NIU programs, these are state-sponsored programs, and I'm sure a lot of that money is funneled through like you said, the Swedish Hockey Federation. But there's 18 of them?
24.
24. Okay, so let's put that into perspective. Roughly, what do you think there's total amount of players are at the J18 level? How many teams?
So they have just one team per
no, what I'm trying to do is get a comparison of the pot of players, or the mass of players in Sweden versus the amount in the United States. You know, we pride ourselves on our model, which is the ADM, and we pride ourselves on, oh, we've got a national team. Look at how great they are. But you're saying it's different, that you're actually running 24 national teams for players. So once again, when everybody says, oh, we're modeled on the European system, we're modeled on Sweden, you know, look at how great they do. And what are we doing wrong? I mean, I hear this all the time with people on the development side. Why are these small countries doing such a better job than us?
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Think about that. There's a difference in an amazing amount of difference. If you got 24 teams that from age, 15, you said 15, 16?
So it'll be 16. Yeah.
16. They move in the model, and they're staying there from 16 to 19, whatever the age is there.
Yep.
And they're immersing themselves, compared to, we have two teams in the whole United States, and they're from 17 and 18. They get 2 years in the program.
Yep. And you have to look and where did the NTDP get modeled from?
Well, it's the National Development Program is a thesis paper that was written by a guy named Martel, who's works in the national office in Colorado Springs. Did a fine job with the paper, and it was talking about long-term development. It was very involved in the Universal Olympic model, soccer, hockey. Hockey really doesn't get many direct studies done on it. Most of what we do is based on other sports like soccer, track, wrestling, and we base our model off of that. But the American development model, you can go watch my video on that and how the American development model came to be. That's a whole different discussion. My point is, if there's $6 or $7 million a year that's put mostly into admin and supporting other programs, can you imagine what we could have done with that money if it was all putting maybe 12, 20 teams in different parts of the United States, and let them be the national team's feeding system?
Yeah, and here's the thing.
Amazing.
Here's the other part that I think is the true secret to the Swedish success in the junior level is, so let's say you are a U16 stud, and you can play for that team. You can play for the J18 team. You may play for the J20 team, and you practice with all three of them. So what bums me in the USA Hockey stuff is that you cannot play up, cannot double roster, you have to just play with this team, and that's it. And I think that if you are a really good player and you want to play more and practice more, you can eat it up. You can play as much as you can.
Well, the irony of this is most players at 15, 16, 17, and 18 that are not in the USHL, not in the North American Hockey League, if they're playing U18, they're doing exactly that, because let's be honest. What is put down in the ADM model about development and when development starts isn't the reality. And we don't follow our own model when it comes to the elite of the elite players in the United States. And it starts off at 12 years old. It starts off at 8 years old. Look at the brick. And
Yep.
these kids are playing into the spring. You know, not all of them play all summer, spring and summer, but we don't. We have a commercial model that probably 70 to 90% of the players moving up follow the commercial model, and that is you play for a U18 team, but you're doing showcases in the spring with this team. You're doing tournaments with this team in the summer, and you're playing for other teams. You're playing to get into the Quebec tournament. You're playing to get into the Toronto OHL tournament. You're playing to get into the Worlds. I think they do it in Philly. All those tournaments between the ages of 8 or 9 up to 15, kids are playing to get in those, or they're playing on teams that have the opportunity to play as those, and they're still worried about spring hockey. So we have the model that's in the book, and then we have the model that we really do. And that's the part that frustrates me on this whole process. I'm sorry to, digress a little bit, but I think that's an important difference between our systems. There's a true, process of letting the kids have a little bit more freedom to make choices versus us that if you followed the governance, you wouldn't have any freedom. But then there's a retail market that allows you to have plenty of freedom too. And we all say, oh, no, skate less, more practice, less games. I'm not a fan of that myself personally, because you need to compete to find out if you can compete. You need to play with 1 minute left on the clock to see if you can be a good player. You need to be down by 2 goals to see if you've got it in you to fight back. All those things are important, just as important to me as those practices are and those skill development sessions. And Bloomer, I know you see the world from a different angle because you salute the red, white, and blue, don't you?
No, I mean, I think I understand the development model from Swedish's perspective of letting the kids kind of dictate where their ability level lays. But it's very difficult, I think, on my end as a scout to really determine if I'm watching a younger kid that's playing in an older level, determine like where exactly do I see him if he is going to come over to the United States and whatnot. Whereas when you're watching kids that are coming through like the North American model, I'll throw Canada in there, you're looking at similar birth years. And then if there's a kid that pops way out, you're like, okay, I understand how this would translate into our league or whatnot. When you look in Sweden, it's always hard because you have to say, okay, what's his birth year? Okay, what's the current birth year of J20 or J18? And how many points is he putting up? And that gets a little tricky. But again, I'm looking at it from my eyes and how it can help us for our program, not for that individual kid, and where is his development path going to take him and all of that. So I completely get where he's, where Jacob's kind of walking us through like where the different options are and kind of where these kids fall and why they do get some of these advantages to play up, because it would make a kid a much better player rather than dominating his own age level, go up an age level or two. And, if you're continuing to dominate, then now you're on like the national scene for the NHL and things like that. So it's probably helpful for those scouts to see this kid in that same environment. So it is definitely confusing at times, but I think from a pure development model, when we look in that lens, I think Sweden has it figured out a little bit better than we do. We're more restrictive, to Jacob's point, with where these kids are able to move around and then you get into, you can only play for one team and you can't play for two. And, that restricts kids throughout, their year, depending on where they're at. So, that's kind of my point on it.
Well, and I can give a comparison on that when we're looking at, the choice that we made about do we stay here or do we go over there? And it was a fairly easy. The biggest reason why we did it was sure, hockey was a big part of it, but the other part was the experience as a young 17-year-old to be able to go. Sure, it was going back to, we've been over there during summers and we have family over there, but the ability to grow up as a young man and be on your own was very enticing. And then the second, so just be able to have a different, I mean, if he was going to go up north, billet with a family, versus go live on his own in a new country and experience that part, you have a huge difference from a quality of life standpoint. The other part was so from a hockey perspective, incredible facilities. There's no restriction of ice time where you're practicing every day, sometimes twice a day. So the amount of ice time that you're getting, even on just being on one team. And if you're then able to play both J18, if you look at elite prospects, a lot of these guys play J18, J20 in Division II, or J18, J20 in Division III. Or if you're really good, you may play J20 in Division I or Allsvenskan or even SHL for the top players. But in our case, we knew that we were going to have an opportunity to play for two teams. At the J20 level, wasn't at the top level, and as a matter of fact, now after Christmas, so I just went and picked him up Monday, and he's going back after New Year's and has the opportunity to move in season to another team, another organization at the J20 region, which used to be called Elite, within the same season. And it's strange for us because we're like, whoa, changing teams in the middle of the season. Well, it's very common that happens. And especially if you have the opportunity to move to a higher level.
Gotcha.
And, that was enticing to us.
We got to say hi to some people here. We got Kim from Pennsylvania on. We've got Alba and Jamie and Kim watching too. We've got Karen watching. Paul, nice to see you. Another Paul. We got Paul P and Paul G on. Elizabeth is on, and Christian's on. Also, we've got a few people on. Pennsylvania's in the house. Jeff's listening from Ohio. Mark's is on from New Hampshire. And we've got Weston, Wisconsin on. Amherst, Mass on. Nebraska's on. And Connecticut. Troy just jumped on from Connecticut, or at least just threw a comment up there too. Hey, if you've got questions about Swedish hockey, feel free to ask them. We'll have Jacob on for the whole hour. And we've got just an interesting conversation about how it works in Sweden. We'd love your comments. We'd love your questions too. Just another way we're trying to offer the service of explaining junior hockey, not just in North America now. Now we're worldwide on our discussion of hockey. Maybe next we'll go into Japan and China and discuss how it works there too. But I've got a couple questions for you. First of all, Jacob, money. Talk about the expenses for, what does it cost to be on a team? If I got to get an apartment for my kid, what's the cost there? Food, I can only speak as a tourist. Food was much more expensive in Sweden than what we're used to in the States. But maybe you can kind of put all that together and give us an idea of what a financial package would cost a kid to play over there.
Yeah, and I mean for us, so we chose the route of, I mean, some players they may go over and live with a billet family, and that certainly would be the most economical. There are exchange organizations that you can go through, and that is pretty expensive. It's how I came to this country.
Now, is that more education wise? Do you do that, or would that be hockey wise?
Yeah, no, that would be. So what's interesting when you look at different exchange organizations, they're financially driven. They want to recruit people to go to different countries, and those are money making organizations. But you can do the same thing. You don't necessarily what's interesting is that applying for a student or residence permit to be a student, if you're ahead of the game when it comes to time wise, as long as you factor in the time wise that it takes to apply, and you're smart about it. If you're thinking about it now for the fall, maybe you apply for a residence permit. What you'll find is that local schools, getting a place at the local school, you don't need to go through an organization to do that. if you have connections and you work through a club, they can probably help with a host family or a billet family to be able to pair you up with. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for those things, and it's intriguing for a Swedish family to host someone. And so that is certainly one option that isn't super expensive. Now, food
Well,
and
probably with that, Jacob, you're going to be tied to schools that are you're going to be tied to that region or that team for whatever school. So you're kind of working into with with a little hope you get into the right region or the right area for a team that's what you would consider quality or one of the better programs.
yeah.
So you'd have to have some knowledge of Sweden to be able to make that successful, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's not something that any Tom, Dick, and Harry's not going to just say, hey, I'm just going to go and figure it out. The challenge, though, is that the competition at the NIU levels is tough. I mean, it's impossible, I would think, for an American to get in to the NIU because they start recruiting at the age of 14, 15, and they already got their,
why would they want an American in the program?
Exactly. It's a long-term path for them, and they're going to say, no, we're going to be, and we face that, right? So when we were looking at schools, and I called around, and I'm from there, no, we're full, and if you're not a student here, we're going to be focusing on that. And I get it. But then there's other organizations that may not play so where Eric played, we played all of those teams, but we were not necessarily at the top levels. You got all the development, you got all the ice time, but you're playing the top teams, the NIU programs out there because you're in the same division.
So let's get back to the actual, if you're going to wrap up a cost and give just a parameter of, what an average American family that may not have to use a conduit. They're not using a company to get over there, but let's say they found a team over there. They're going to live in an apartment.
Yep.
So they got to pay for their apartment, their food, and their hockey. Roughly, what do you think that cost would be?
Yeah, I'm probably going to do the year-end numbers here in my financials. So I know I wish I would have done it ahead of time, but I would say that it's comparable, right? I mean,
you threw me a number a couple weeks ago that was really good.
Well, no, that was the fees. So like I thank you for steering me here. You're leading me, Your Honor. But the fees are very low. So for example, if you play juniors and you play even tier 3 juniors, and you may have a 10, 15 grand fees for just a club, right? The fees may be 1,500 or less. In the bigger cities, they're going to be a little bit more. But let's say tops 2,000, right? And you can go to a tier 2 U16 club and pay $5 grand in fees here, right? And over there, that's and what's included in that is they ride the charter bus to all the teams, to all the games. They typically get a meal when they have away games, and that's all included in those fees, or what they call training costs.
Right.
But that's just like, okay, you may pay 15 grand if you play tier 3 juniors to the club, and then you may have to pay billeting fees, right? But if you play AAA youth hockey in the US, where's the biggest cost is not going to be the fee to the organization, it's going to be the travel costs.
Correct.
And hotel, lodging, and airfare, which is a huge cost for parents. So you may put 20, 30 grand easily in a season over here, where that may be, more like,
excuse me,
I don't know, 8 or 10,000. So from a financial standpoint, I think it's definitely not an expensive option. Now, finding housing is not easy. I know a player, and he stayed in a hotel every night. Their parents got him in a hotel, and because it was the only thing that was available.
Well, so from my experience on that, in all the movies I've watched, there's always Swedish airline stewardesses that have, 3 or 4 that are living in an apartment that need a roommate. So I don't
Yeah.
think that's really an issue because the movies
Where do I
I've
sign
seen.
up?
uh, I have a question that I just lost because Mike spoke, and when anytime Bloomer gets on, things
Get
go into a
distracted.
tailspin. The I want to give a comparison. For those that don't know the cost of 16, 18s, in the United States, if you're in the Michigan market, there are teams that are all inclusive at around $6,000, $8,000, and that's all inclusive, meaning if they're going on long trips, there's short trips parents take care of, long trips there's charter buses. You get out on the West Coast, Colorado, LA, Anaheim, things like that. That number can be well past 20,000. And Bloomer, you probably have a better understanding of what they cost. What's the range in the Chicago market now?
I think at the end of the year, you're looking around 20 grand.
And is that mostly travel or is that ice time?
Yeah, I think the fees would be somewhere around 10 to 15, depending on the program. And then as you're traveling around and, equipment, all that other stuff that you're paying for throughout the year, you're going to be close to about 20 grand. And you can obviously go above. There's teams that are traveling outside of like their typical league play that are doing extra showcases and different stuff. And I mean, it can really get expensive. So,
Yeah.
but I would say anywhere around 20 grand is probably, if you're playing AAA in Chicago, that's a good number to sit on.
Yeah. Troy just commented that Tier 3 juniors is running 10 grand or so. Very true, Troy. That's a good average number. But there are junior programs out there, depending on what part. Remember now, the USPHL, the unregulated league, tends to be a little more expensive in some markets. It's a Tier 3 juniors tends to be a market-driven program, meaning supply and demand. The programs that are further away, the programs that have less competition, tend to be the more expensive ones. So you get out on the West Coast, it's not uncommon to see a program $13,000 to $15,000 to play. And maybe it's justifiable because of the travel, getting a bus. And, I know that in the Western New York area, when we had to charter, we owned 2 buses for our junior programs when I owned junior teams. But to go out and get a bus, let's say we broke down for the weekend and we needed a bus, we were spending a minimal of $1,000 a day. So to take your team on the road and you're going to spend, $3,000, depending on if it's overnight, $2,000 for an overnight. If you're staying the weekend, it could be $3,000, $4,000, depending on how many days you stay out. And that's not uncommon. So when you do that for half your games, you can see that a large expense for all teams is travel. And that's not including airfare travel, because in the western part of the United States and Chicago, you guys do a fair amount of travel when you guys go. You use air to fly. Detroit tends to be a little bit more blue collar, and those parents will put 8 people in an old 72 Cadillac and head out to Boston for the weekend and still have room, So, all right, Mike, you wanted to compare it a little bit to what's going on. And I know this is a person you and I know very well. It's the general manager for Dubuque, who's Swedish. And I know, Jacob, you're familiar with and know Callie also. Yep. But they've used the Swedish model probably better and more effectively than any other junior program in North America. And I shouldn't say in North America, in the United States, Tier 1, Tier 2, definitely. But I don't know, Canada doesn't use foreign players like the United States does. So a foreign player to a Canadian team is an American. That's about the extent of it. Tell us a little bit about, Mike, what you were looking at today. Was you looked at the Dubuque Saints and their program.
Yeah, so they, right off the start, they've got 4 Swedish players that are on their team, 2 of which are already NHL draft picks. So right off the bat, that the players that they are bringing in from Sweden are going to be real impact players from their team. So, the USHL has their import rule where they can only have a certain amount of imports. And I think they have like a new rule that's relatively or has been relatively new as far as having 2 Canadians on your roster. It gives you a little bit more than the 4 that you can roster and things like that. But for the most part, they're using their imports on Swedish players. And, you mentioned Callie Larson, who's their GM. He is a Swedish person. So obviously he's got good contacts out there and is able to identify top players and then get them to want to come over and whatnot. So, they've always had success in the league, but they've also had success with, bringing top quality players over. And those kids do really well. They either get drafted and find their way into the NHL, but they're getting Division I scholarships at some of the top programs. And that's only helped them probably get more of these players to come over. So, looking at them, they do the right thing when it comes to, their development model and identifying players and bringing them over and things like that. But what I was curious, and I was going to ask earlier to Jacob, is, are there any import rules currently in the J18 or J20 as far as like bringing Canadians or Americans or even, somebody from Finland or anywhere into their league? Is there any limitations with that, or is it wide open?
No, it's wide open. It's wide open.
Yeah. So going back to our earlier point of just how restrictive things are here, I guess in North America, because the Canadian junior leagues are very restrictive too, as far as how many Americans you can bring over, imports, and, there's a financial element also to, bringing imports into these different teams and whatnot. It's just interesting how it's so much different over in Sweden with really there's no restrictions on these kids.
Well, the restrictions are going to be immigration restrictions, and they're very tough. So and I think the numbers show that, right? That especially from here. One thing though that I think is interesting with Dubuque that you ought to look at, and that is the tendency of, if you look at those players that Kalle is bringing in, they're typically last year players.
Yeah.
So they may have 4 guys, but they may get 4 guys every season that are last year players, that are impact players. And if you think about it from a standpoint of, if you're a player, you just finished juniors in Sweden, you now have a year of eligibility, and you're not getting your shot in the SHL. So you're either playing at the third level, and you may not have gotten drafted, or you may have gotten drafted, and this is where you're but it's not going to be the top draft picks. The top draft picks are playing either right in the NHL, right in the AHL, or they're playing in the SHL. But that next level down, which is still a really, really good player, they're able to go straight in and get a big role, because all of a sudden you're 3 years older than some of the guys. You've already proven yourself at the J20 national level, and you're coming in and you play 1 year. And then next year, here comes another group. So even though you may have an import restriction, it's not like you're going to have that import restriction guy for 3 years. So in reality, you may have 10 guys. And what they do really, really smart is that they are playing that game really well, and they're bringing impact players in right away for a short period of time, and they get exposure, get a D1 scholarship, and they go the collegiate route, and then they continue to develop, and they may stay for a couple of years, and then they go into the pros, or they may stay for the full.
That's a really good point too. When you look at the player perspective on that, is if you're aging out of juniors in Sweden, but you're not one of those top echelon guys that are in, the SHL, and you're a little bit more on that longer development curve, even though, like we pointed out, 2 guys here already on the Dubuque roster that are drafted, they're a little bit lower, drafted a little bit later, I should say. So they're on a little bit of a longer development path. So coming over to the USHL, getting a Division I scholarship at a good school is going to keep them on that development path. They're not going to get lost in the shuffle, out in Sweden. They're going to be at a premier program, probably playing for Dubuque in the USHL. And then they have another 3-4 years on their development path before they turn pro and, go into the AHL or wherever they're going to be at that point. rather than staying in maybe playing against men and getting a little bit lost in the shuffle in Sweden and not developing like they should.
And so I looked up one of them as an example. So Nils Juntorp, 03 forward, 6th round draft pick by the Chicago Blackhawks. He's not going to go straight in and play in the NHL. He's not going to go and even play in the AHL, but he's drafted, right? Impact player for them. But then, so he may go play college, and then the idea may never be to play pro in the NHL.
Right.
But now you're getting to play at a really high level, and then you go back to Sweden and play at Allsvenskan or SHL and now you're actually able to compete. It's so difficult for that 20-year-old to go and compete with men that are 30 or guys that have played and maybe didn't make it in the NHL and they return back, or they're bringing imports in the SHL. It is AHL level at the SHL level. So these guys, so if you compare the level, so I've had several guys on, like Jack Carlson, who just won the title with the New Jersey Titans last year, and he's now playing D3. And you know, he played J20 National for Färjestad, one of their top programs, and then he's going over and he played for the Titans for a year, I believe. And what he's saying is that the NAL is right below J20 National. And then you got the USHL. So you're coming in, you know, you may not, you know, and I think that's the interesting part, since you guys are kind of with NAL teams. USHL is so tough, and we can talk about these guys that are going to be drafted and these guys. I think the interesting conversation is about the NAL. And, you know, there's 23 Swedish players in the NAL right now. There's 13 in the USHL if you look at elite prospects. And
that's about proportionately right, though. The league's twice as big. So
yeah,
they're all getting about the same amount of players on average.
But I think that that type of a player is interesting, right? Because it's it is a little bit of an older league, and you're coming in and you're still, you know, that's an attractive path that you're still able to go and go into the.
Yeah, your point about what Cali did with Dubuque is important, because the USHL is not known for taking last year players. The USHL is known to bring in young talent and stick with them for a couple years. So by going in and saying, look, we're going to make a market just in Swedish players in their last year, works for them, which is a model that's more aligned with the NAL, because the NAL does take players from around the world in their last year in juniors, at least last year in the United States or Canada, because as you were speaking, the players in Europe, especially Sweden, they get chopped off 1 year earlier than what the players in the United States and Canada get chopped off at. So it's interesting, you know, because they're so successful, and they are successful, very successful with Sweden, you know, is there going to be a turn at some point where there's more people like Cali hired by the USHL and the NAL, just that focuses on that market to find these players, or to entice them to come over? Because I don't know if the NAL is necessarily getting that next guy down from the USHL, that one that's just on the bubble. I think we're getting a good pool of Swedish players and their quality, but is there a gap between the USHL level Swede coming over and what the NAL's getting on, you know, just on point average? Where does that fit? Is there a gap there? And,
well, if you're looking at the scouting budgets for a Dubuque versus a scouting budget for a NAL team, it's a little bit harder for the NAL to. It's easier to scout at home, right? With who's going to the.
You haven't seen that Rolls Royce that Bloomer drives around? That's all.
I haven't either.
Money there, man. That's all.
I think it's probably a little bit more like driving Miss Daisy, but you know.
That's right. He's doing the driving. That's right. It's Uber.
Yeah. So, but I do think that the challenge, and this is the same challenge that we were talking about earlier, about the fear of going back over there for us, is you may get lost, right? And it's also the playing style is so much different. The rink is much different. So you're recruiting that player. It's easy to be able to recruit the guy that played J20 National, one of the best players in Sweden, right? It's a little bit harder to recruit that next level player to see, is that going to, it's the known versus the unknown.
Right.
And they may not come for every camp that you have.
That's, it's the same dilemma that in the States, it's like bringing a player out of some of the CJHL Canadian leagues to see if they equate at the USHL or the NAL level. They might be doing a fantastic job playing in Manitoba or playing in Saskatchewan, and some do translate over, but there's a lot that don't translate over from those leagues. So very difficult to get that down. I wanted to kind of move it back and say, or discuss the Americans or Canadians that want to go over there. Let's say I figure out a way to get past the visa issue. You and I had this conversation going back 2 years ago. Is it a good move? And I guess the thing that intrigued me most about it, and one of the responses I gave to you was, hey, who cares about hockey? That's such a great social move. That's the culture and the social experiment of going and living there a lot more independently than you do with your parents. And to get that exposure to both hockey and to life in a different part of the world, I don't know how you could go wrong at 16 or 17. As long as you maintain a decent level of hockey, it's a phenomenal experience. And, because there's so much ice and because there's so much opportunity to, if you're independent enough to help grow yourself on your own, if your team's not so good, I still think there's an avenue to come back. I don't know if you'll get exposed the same way from scouts unless you as a player are putting, video together. You're making sure you're staying in contact with U18 coaches. You're staying in contact with junior coaches. I think there's a path back. But to be honest with you, Bloomer and I have been doing this a long time. I know of one player that left U16 that jumped over from the States. And that was here's the irony. It was the ADM director from Michigan. It was his kid. So it was an ADM guy that leaves to go play in Europe and play in Sweden. And then came back and actually, jumped back on path. So I honestly don't see any reason why anybody wouldn't take that. And let's say you're wrong. And let's say you don't, that you don't have the talent to get to the next level. You're living in Europe for a season. You're getting a different taste of culture. That's gonna bode well for the rest of your life. It's going to be a life experience. It's probably going to help you get into a good college because you got an experience that nobody else has on their resume. I don't see why anybody wouldn't take a chance. Now, would I take a 3-year chance on this? Probably not. But would I do it for a season, especially if I'm young enough that I can come back and still play juniors? I absolutely think it's an awesome and incredible experience. Plus, it's cheap. I shouldn't say it's inexpensive. Cheap doesn't sound right. So, but Bloomer, what do you think?
Well, you just were making me think of something, and I'm going to ask you this question. When we talk about if a kid that's an American that decides to go over to Sweden and play out there, if they would get lost in the shuffle, when you're going to scout a Canadian junior team and you go to Elite Prospects and you pull that team up, what's the first thing you look at?
Where they're from.
Exactly. And basically you're looking for any Americans because that's not going to cost us any money and it's not going to take an import spot. So if there were more Americans playing in Sweden and scouts knew that, because right now there's not a whole lot, so it's not necessarily something we're obviously looking for. But if you knew that there were a handful of American kids on certain teams, we would 100% be scouting that team or that league, because those are players that if they have the ability level and they're already playing out there and they're developing out there, that we would want to scout to come back over into our league. So
there's a lot of pressure on your son right now, Jacob. He's got to give us a lot of reason to be watching him so that we can also find some other players to bring with him. So he's got work to do.
So, but and let me add this too, and a plug in for one of our earlier episodes on the Swedish Junior Hockey podcast, and that was, they have an incredible way to go in and watch games. All games of all junior teams, all the way up to J20 National, are available live and archived on what's called svenskhockey.tv, which is kind of the hockey TV. And it's an incredible quality. And you can go in and watch live, I mean, full
so
games.
They named that sour fish dish and the hockey program the same name?
So maybe we should have sponsored by the Swedish Swedish chef from the Muppets, and that should be your outro of this.
I wasn't going to go there at all because I figured that'd be very offensive. So I was purposely staying away from any of the Orky Borky jokes from
that's
Muppets,
right.
Although that was my favorite program up to last year.
But what I was going to say is I think that it's easy to go in and watch. Plus, Instat pulls all of the clips and all the information. You got to be careful though, because the stats are not, how do you interpret those stats? I think it's much better to go in and look at the player to see.
So you're saying the exchange rate gets involved with the stats too?
Yeah. No, I just think that it's, if you are playing, I give you an example. If you play on one of the top teams and you may beat a team 10-0, you may come out of that with 3 points, right? Because
the same side of that, Jacob, there's a lot of great scorers from the NHL on down that have come over from Sweden and Finland that they finished the season with 19 points over there. And then when they get to the NHL, that equates to 60 points for the year or 50 points for the year. Just a different style of hockey. And, it's more of a team concept game over there that puts less emphasis on having one star and having a spread out distribution of points. So it's very difficult. That was when, my favorite team, Bloomers, seems to have the same favorite team too on the NHL side. That is a Detroit Red Wing emblem behind you, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, they've had very good success with Swedish players, but if you notice their numbers before they got over into the NHL, didn't look like they were going to be super big point producers, and they actually turned out to be that. So I think anybody that knows hockey knows that number could be inflated either one way or another over there, and I don't think they put much emphasis on that. I know when I'm looking at European players, I don't put as much emphasis on the points as I do the skill level and what they're doing in the game and what they're producing as far as making plays and actually making their teammates look better.
And I think that it's easy. I mean, there's plenty of data for you to look at on any player in any level in Sweden. Is just, if you got a subscription to which is cheap, which I'm sure every NAL and every USHL team has, you can go in and just look at it, right?
Yeah. We have Instat, which is all part of the RinkNet system, which is all part of Elite Prospects. It's all mashed together now, which makes things pretty nice. I want to say hi to a few people that have come on over the course of the show here, and then I know Bloom, you wanted to jump in a couple of the players. Actually, I think one of them was one that Jacob already mentioned. I'm not sure if I'm correct on that.
Not one that he's mentioned, but we can give that player a little shout out here later.
Yeah. So anyway, we've got Omaha coming on. We already said hi to Troy, and we said hi to Mark. South Windsor, Connecticut jumped on. I know somebody come on and said they're enjoying it. I think I saw that note. I think that was Jeff that says he's watching and enjoying it. Another John jumped on and watching. Dave jumped on, said hello. Carlos is watching. Eric is on. Randy's on. Steven's on. Mike's on. Christine is on. We got a great group. I know we've been flowing through people because people jump on and jump off all the time. Long Island just jumped on, and Lori, the impressive, fantastic savant of goalie observation from Northern Michigan is on. And she says hi to Bloomer and Jeff. She is a member of the staff and does a great job. So good to see her on. Tony jumped on from St. Louis. Mark says, awesome podcast team. Good to see that. Thank you, Mark. So we got a lot of people over the course of the night. Bloom, talk to me a little bit about the USHL tonight. And we did feature a GM, but we're going to feature his team. I should tell you, over the last 3 or 4 years, I put out a rating of the USHL drafts, and I discussed that on one of the podcasts, live streams, or whatever we call it. And we discuss who has the best draft class as far as production, and we talk about efficiency of the draft and production of the draft, effectiveness. So in the last 4 years, always in the top 3, it's Dubuque right now. They do a phenomenal job of recruiting players, and they have been doing that for the last few years. And I attribute a lot of that to Callie and what Callie's doing. So Bloomer, jump on. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, and one other quick thing I'll share, just not only are they doing a great job of moving their players to Division I and obviously the NHL and things like that, they also do a really good job of moving their staff, their coaches, their assistants, their scouts, things like that. They do a really nice job of moving them on to different places and things like that too. So that's got to be a credit to Callie and maybe his connections or just his like mindset for development and things like that. They just do they're one of the premier programs in the USHL. And I think a lot of it has to do with Callie. So we'll give him a lot of shout out here today on the podcast. But what we wanted to look at was they have a matchup on Saturday where they actually play the US NTTP team. And, you know, right now that team is on fire. Again, the US program, this is another really strong birth year for them. So within the league, their record is 12-5-1, and they're playing Dubuque in Dubuque, who their record is 11-7-1. So very similar in wins-loss record. You know, staying with the Swedish theme, the player that we want to spotlight isn't one of the drafted kids that we had already mentioned, but his name is Oliver Moberg. He's a 2003 birth year. He's 6'3", 201, so pretty big boy. He's coming from Bromma, Sweden. I think that's how you say it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob. But he is it Bromma?
Yep, outside of Stockholm.
Yep. So he currently has played 17 games. He's got 5 goals, 10 assists for 15 points. So he's 2 points shy of being a point-a-game player in his first year in the USHL. He's the guy that we're highlighting as a player to look out for in this matchup.
I actually am trying to pull him up for everybody to see. He has his picture on the Elite Prospects page. I will toss him up in a corner here if you give me a second. And of course, you know, this new software makes it a little difficult. We'll throw him up in the link so people can see him. And this will be fun, Jacob, because we'll be able to see if your theory works. We've got some really good Swedish players against some really good Americans, and it's a good matchup to see. Now, my personal opinion is, you know, I would expect top NHL drafted. Now, both teams have NHL draft picks on them, but top 21-year-olds to have the upper hand because of just the age, the size, and strength versus you know, players that are a few years younger. That's not always the case, especially with this group. This U.S. program is pretty strong at that age, so maybe it doesn't work out that size and strength is the catalyst for them. So, Mike, thanks for that. Any other players on that team that stick out to you as far as the Swedish players?
Well, their starting goaltender's a Swede, and he's kind of the backstop there that keeps them in a lot of games, even when they're not playing well in front of them. So he's clearly a difference maker for them. But again, this program, they have a lot of NHL draft picks. You know, the U.S. program is talented and they skate well and they can make plays, but they can also be beat. And Dubuque is a team that I think is, you know, going to give them everything they can, especially with it being at home. So it should. That's why we picked it. Number one, it's got the staying with the Swedish theme and them really utilizing their imports to go along with talking to Jacob today. But the matchup itself is going to be really good. It's two really good teams playing against each other. A lot of skill on the ice, a lot of speed, good coaching. So there's a lot to see when you're watching that game.
Yeah, and the player that we highlighted, Oliver Moberg, actually had experience playing the World Juniors. I think he won a bronze already, bronze or silver. I could be off on that one, but he is an international level player. He's been well respected on the international stage. But interesting enough, I was listening to one of your podcasts, Jacob, and you were talking about, I don't understand this. Honestly, it sounded to me like what you were talking about was Dancing with the Stars or maybe one of these, the Voice shows, because you were talking about what the heck is the name of it? Something TV Moken or TV Pukin or something. Oh. To me, it sounded like you were talking about some kind of game show. What is that?
I probably should talk a little bit more about it. It's actually one of the most. So there was this very, very famous hockey player named Sven Tumba, who was on the national team in soccer, national team in hockey, and also on the national team in golf. But he started the TV Puck tournament, which is the best. It's basically a national tournament that was back in the 60s when not everybody had TVs. It was televised. So, and it's still going on now. And it's the most, so if you think about the Quebec tournament for Pee-wees here and how important that is, for 15-year-old is the best. So Rasmus Dahlin was the top player in the TV Puck tournament. So it's called TV Pucken. But it's the TV Puck tournament that is a nationalized, televised. And what's cool about that is each region or each parish has a team. So it's not a club level team. So it's a select team that and it's really, it's the start of, you would call that the start of who's who that's going to become on the national team at U16. Because there's no U15 national team, but there is a U16 national team, and it's chock full of those guys. And so when you look at the elite prospects, you'll see where we see on the U.S. and Canadian player about the Brick and the Quebec,
right?
Or the when they make the district and the national teams, you'll see TV Puck or TV Pucken. And it'll say the parish, Dahlin, which is the parish where I'm from. And they may have won a championship at that level. So all of these guys, if you pull up Marcus Brenman, who's the goalie that you just talked about, yes, he played on the TV Puck tournament. Actually, I don't see it in here. He's got so much good stats, but he's also played at the.
I usually see it down towards the bottom where it says career highlights on elite prospects.
The Oliver Moberg, he's got the TV.
All of them do. They all do. It's because you're talking about 25 teams of 25 players is the best of the best, and some of them play for 2 years as well. But
so no dancing, no singing, just
no. There's. I was wondering where you were going with that.
Well, I kind of figured I had to do something with TV from talking to you earlier. And for a lot of you out there that do not have direct experience with Quebec or the Brick, Quebec is like Little League World Series level hockey. Canada covers that on their version of ESPN. They do in-between period interviews. They have analysts. They have, 3 people on the staff in the booth doing the games, and it's in a jam-packed arena. I mean, you're playing in front of an NHL-sized crowd. So that's our only, equate, I guess. I don't know of any other event that draws or does anything in North America like Quebec does. And if you have the chance to experience Quebec, even as a fan, my first time up there was as a fan. I went up there because I hadn't been there before, and this is right when the internet was starting. And it was incredible, walking in and thinking I was going to, and then, to be honest with you, my nephew played, we had a great experience. They made it to the semis. When my son played, they made it to the playoffs too. And we showed up at the rink 2 hours early, and I'm with NHLers. I think on his team, I don't know. It was one of the Sabres. His last name starts with a P. Help me out, guys. Captain
With a
of the
what?
team. Last name started with a P. A Sabre from about 5-10 years ago. He's captain. Come on, help me out. Pekka. So Pekka's the kid's on the team too. So I'm walking in with him, and we ended up in the very last row behind the net because everybody gets there so early for the playoff games, and it's open seating. We thought, well, they'll probably have a section for the parents. Our kids are in the finals. There's going to be a section for us, right? No, we literally were standing up with our wall against the bricks in an old NHL rink as far away as you could possibly get. And that's how packed that place gets for 12-year-olds. So I bring that up because, most people don't know when that comparison you were talking about, Jacob, that, how big that event is for you and what we have over here that's in comparison.
Yeah. So if you see that in the that's at the U15 level, and after that they go into gymnasium or they play U16, and then they have another the first year in high school.
That's a good tip, just for us to know that if they are playing in that, or they have that listed, that they were thought of as one of the top guys at that time.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good to know. Hey, Jacob, thank you so much.
Scenario that you were talking about, what's actually a lot of fun is if you go onto YouTube and you take some of the current NHL stars, you can go back and see them playing in that Quebec tournament as little kids. Like you can see Jonathan Toews and, Sagan and all these guys, and they were tearing it up back then. They were the best players on the ice. It's just kind of funny to go back and see them as just little kids out there ripping around.
If you haven't experienced that, one of the fun things about that is they have a non-commercialized, you can't buy or sell pins, but they let you trade pins at the rink. And some of these pins, like Honey Bake, they put a pin together like with 6 or 7 things that stick in the back. And the gaudier your pin, the more trade value it has. So you actually go in there and you can take a Honey Bake pin and get like 10 other, and they do it by years. They do it by teams. And, teams that didn't get in very often, those are rare. And then, the popular teams are they have value to them too. But it's all in trade. So you got these booths of people that spend years and years and years trading pins, and they go in there and set up the display booths of pins. And then you get all these kids that are, kids and adults trading pins back and forth. And that's just as much fun to watch people-wise in that event is the hockey itself, because it's just this tradition. And I know I digress again, but you got to expect that from me. That's what I'm good at. Rabbit holes. I do it very well. I wanted to point out there was a comment on there that if anybody didn't see it, about a family that actually considered going over with their 03 to Sweden. Didn't quite make it, but I threw that comment on. And then we just had a comment of a player that's heading over to play in Quebec this year. Good. I hope you have a great experience there with that. Jacob, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Once again, where can we find your podcast? I'll put it in the link, but if somebody wants to get your podcast, where do you get it?
It's very easy. We're on Apple and Spotify and all the different outlets, but it's just Swedish Junior Hockey Podcast. If you just Google Swedish Junior Hockey Podcast, you'll find it. And we release once a week, and it's low key. It's fun. Hopefully it's educational. The main thing is to kind of show and educate people in the U.S. and Canada about how it works and different how the system works and some stories over there that people may find useful or entertaining, either one.
So I got to figure out how to get a cut of this, because we can go to, we can do this in Finland. We can, because your show sounds awful familiar to a different show that I know. I just can't put my finger on exactly what show that is, but there's one out there that's similar. So maybe it'll be like The Voice. The Voice is in every country now. So is Dancing with the Stars. Now we just have different junior hockey advisors with Sweden and Japan, and that'd be awful fun.
Yep.
Jacob, thank you so much. I am so glad you got on. You're a wealth of information on this. I'm sure we're going to absolutely have to do this again to get a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on. You originally said you could talk for hours. Well, we went an hour and a half. That's close. But
well, I got to run and referee a beer league game here, actually two. We got the late 2 games tonight, so I'm heading out of here in a few minutes.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and everybody, thank you for tuning in. It's a different platform for us tonight. We used a different streaming service. Put it in the comments how the system worked. How was the quality of it? Of the comments, the audio, the visual. Let us know how all that worked. Was it easier to get a hold of us as far as when you wanted to send a message to us and you wanted to comment? Please let us know all that. Let us know how that worked, and we're going to be testing one other system this week, and we'll see how it all works as we go along. Once again, Junior Hockey Live tonight. Make sure you tune in to Junior Hockey Advisor Monday or Sunday or Monday night, and please go and like and follow us on YouTube and on our Junior Hockey Advisor page on YouTube. Soon to come, we'll have a Junior Hockey Live site as soon as Bloomer decides to finish it up and get it done. We'll be there. So once again, thank you, folks. Have a good night.
Thanks, Jacob. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
I just got to figure out how to turn it off. Go away, everybody. I'm turning this off.